Ever since the relatively recent mass shootings in Boulder, Colorado, and Dallas, Texas, in March 20th and 22nd, there have been a much stronger push for gun control measures, with people like Joe Biden, people like Kamala Harris, many legislators in the Democratic Party see this as a prime opportunity to start pushing their anti-gun agenda. There are a lot of talking points that you'll hear repeated from these people, these anti-gun legislators, and I'd like to debunk a lot of them here thoroughly. The first one, and this is one you hear a lot, is that the Second Amendment only applies to muskets. Now, common sense would dictate that amendments should obviously apply to things that the founders didn't envision when they wrote it. The founders would obviously have known that weapons would get larger as time progressed, as the country became older. And even then, to have this standard would be horribly stupid. For example, freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, well, today we have the internet, we have YouTube, we have things like Google, things that we can send information in a heartbeat, in a split second, while in the past you had to do it through a printing press that took weeks upon weeks. Does that mean free speech does not apply to the internet? Well, obviously not. And even then, even if we were to only apply that standard to the Second Amendment, it's not even true. The Belt and Flintlock, for example, was a makeshift early assault rifle in 1777 and was able to fire up to 60 rounds in 60 seconds. The founders heavily considered the design for their armies, but shot down the order based on cost concerns. It was very expensive to make. And even then, the Gironde air rifle was a rudimentary semi-automatic firearm that was able to shoot at most 30 rounds a minute. The gun was actually commissioned by the founders to be used in the Lewis and Clark expeditions. And that it doesn't even apply to guns. When he was president, James Madison once wrote a letter to a merchant ship owner, personally clarifying that the Second Amendment protected the use of privately owned cannons to be mounted on his vessel. That's an artillery piece. That's not muskets. And the second talking point, and this isn't really a talking point, it's more a misconception, is that the Second Amendment is only used by rednecks in Alabama and stuff like that. And this is where you would see a clear divide from ideological leftists and partisan leftists. So, James Madison was one of the founders of the Second Amendment. He once wrote that oppressors can tyrannize only once they have disarmed the populace. James Madison and people like him, our founding fathers, fought against absolute monarchs and their oppressive grasp over their peoples. And Karl Marx, and I'm no fan of Karl Marx, but this is an argument to be used against leftists pushing this. He once wrote that under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. He lived under a time when capitalists, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, capitalists oppressed workers systematically. And he argued for these arms to be given to workers. George Orwell, you hear this name a lot. He fought in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the Republicans, fighting fascists. He fought fascists in the Spanish Civil War. He once wrote that the rifle on the wall of the laborer's cottage or working class flat is a symbol of democracy. It is our job to see that it stays there. Frederick Douglass, escaped slave and leader of the abolition movement. He lived under slavery. He knew what it was like to live under an oppressive authority. He once wrote that a man's right rests in three boxes: the ballot box, jury box, and cartridge box. And there are many, many other examples of this throughout history. For example, the Civil Rights Movement with the Black Panthers being disarmed. I could point to Mao Zedong disarming the people before he genocided, millions upon millions of his own citizens. Adolf Hitler disarmed the Jewish population. I could point to so many examples throughout history. The overall history of gun control isn't a struggle between left and right. It is a struggle between the powerful and the powerless. And the only people throughout history that have fought to disarm the populace were doing so to further the intentions and goals of the ruling class at the direct expense of the subjugated. Leftists need to take a step back and ask themselves why they just so happen to align with these people. Number 3, 109 people a day, that's an entire jet airliner, die from gun violence. Now that's a really, really big number, and you hear that and you get really scared and they try to fearmonger you, etc., etc., etc. But this statistic is extraordinarily misleading. It completely overlooks the lives that are saved each year from gun ownership. A 2013 report by the CDC found that firearms are used in self-defense between 500,000 times and 3 million times every year in the United States. The study, again, this only looked at self-reported cases of self-defense and didn't even take into account times in which the mere presence of an open carry deterred a criminal. For example, if I open carried in a store and someone was trying to rob the store but then saw my gun and decided to just go home, well, that would be a case of self-defense that wouldn't have been recorded because I wouldn't even known. But even then, assuming the lowest estimate of the CDC, 500,000, and assuming that only 10% of these cases of self-defense saved the life of the user, that is still 137 lives saved each day from guns. Number 4, children are literally dying in schools. Literally dying in schools. And here we have Obama fake crying. So, to put context to this number, because you hear this all the time and it's order to fearmonger you, about 537 people were killed in mass shootings from 2009 to 2019. I didn't take into account 2020. I didn't take into account 2021 because the year's not even halfway over. Now, for reference, that is 53.7 lives per year. Lightning strikes kill about that amount a year in the United States. 51 people die every year from lightning strikes. So you are about as likely to die in a mass shooting as you are from a lightning strike in the United States. However, due to media overreporting, we have an extremely warped perception of the danger of the mass shooting epidemic, the gun violence epidemic. So again, but that looks at mass shootings, all mass shootings. School shootings are even a smaller portion of that amount, and most likely it would be far, far smaller than the 53 lives per year metric. And number 5, this is one you hear all the time. It's such a common talking point among talking heads in the media. It's that mass shootings are a uniquely American problem. So the original study that found that America ranks number 1 in mass shootings was extraordinarily biased. Number 1, it wasn't even peer-reviewed. The author was a rabid anti-gun lobbyist, and when he was asked to show his data to the public so that we could fact-check his claims, he outright refused. So when we actually look at the real data and the real numbers on the matter, it's far smaller than us being number 1. Out of the 97 countries that saw mass shootings in the year 1998 to 2015, the United States ranked 64th in amount of mass shootings and 65th in their deadliness. In fact, against popular notion among media talking heads, the rate of mass shootings in the US is below average. Below average. I want you to reminisce in that fact for a bit. Look at that fact for a second and realize how much you have been lied to by your trusted press. Our mass shootings are not a uniquely American problem. They're a media problem of selective reporting. And number 6, and you hear this all the time about the NRA. They're the boogeyman for the anti-gun lobby. And they fund politicians to literally kill babies. So this is a huge misconception. The NRA isn't just some faceless corporatists. They their funding is evenly spread among over 5 million members across the United States, some of which are very wealthy, but many, in fact, most are just middle to lower class people who are just really like guns. And the $25 million was spent in lobbying in by the NRA in 2016 alone. And $25 million, that's a lot of money. But let's put that in context. Mike Bloomberg alone spent $65 million in lobbying in 2016 alone. And most of that funds were directly directed in order to combat the NRA. It was for an anti-gun lobby. If politicians who are pro-gun only were so because they're just in it for the money, well, it would make more sense for them to be anti-gun. This is a point that's so easily debunked. And number 7, a good guy with a gun never stopped a bad guy with a gun. And I don't know if you recognize this girl, but she did a speech in CNN. She was one of the victims of the Florida shooting. She was in the school, and she did a speech for anti-guns. And the last part of her speech, it was so dishonest, and it made me just want to reach through my hands and reach to my screen and just choke through this lady. She said, they say a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We call BS. And then she just moves on she just says a bunch of things that pro-gun people say that are true, and then she just says, yeah, no, we call BS. She doesn't give any facts to support that, any anecdotes, anything, any evidence. She just says it because, I don't know, just her feeling, I guess. Oh my god, it was such a dishonest tactic, and it made me want to blow my head off. So, let's get into the facts. More people with guns means a far larger deterrent to criminals, especially people who open carry. Nearly 60% of convicted felons admitted that they avoided committing crimes when they knew the victim was armed. A 1994 survey conducted by the CDC found that Americans use guns to frighten away intruders who are breaking into their homes about 500,000 times per year. A survey done by James D. Wright found that a third of the felons responding from state prisons said that they had been scared off, shot at, wounded, or captured by a victim armed with a firearm. A third of them. And 57% of them said they were more afraid of an armed victim, than a cop. That's more than half who are more afraid of a good guy with a gun than a police officer. And this is, I think, the smoking gun when it comes to the scientific research. A 2008 article in Econ Journal Watch surveyed 18 peer-reviewed empirical academic studies that looked at the effect of making it easier to open carry, right to carry laws, etc., and found that 10 of the 18 studies supported the proposition that right to carry laws reduced crime, while 8 supported no significant effect and none supported a positive effect. Okay, number 8. And you hear this all the time. Well, Bill Clinton did a gun control act, and he stopped mass shootings. And then the Republicans repealed it, and then mass shootings went up again. It's not the case. It's not the case. But they are right that in 1994, Bill Clinton signed the federal assault weapons ban. But contrary to popular beliefs, the federal assault weapons ban didn't actually ban assault weapons, not even close. It only banned high-capacity magazines and some specific design features, for example, certain grips. You could still buy an AR-15 and an AK-47. You just couldn't put, like, a pistol grip on it. It was actually really stupid. In, quote, Firearm Laws and Firearm Homicides, a systemic review, a meta-study of 4 studies on the effect of the 1994 assault weapons ban found that there, quote, isn't enough evidence that the ban was associated with a significant decrease in firearm homicides. Mark Hughes, in an examination of the effects of concealed weapon laws and assault weapons bans on state-level murder rates, found no evidence that the assault weapon ban impacted homicide rates at all. And even then, the law didn't even do anything. So when leftists bring this up as an example of success, you know they're lying. So, and number 9, listen to the science. Gun control saves lives. No, that is not even close. Not even close to what the science says. A 2002 study of the Task Force on Community Preventive Services found, and I quote, insufficient evidence to determine the effectiveness of any of the firearm laws or combinations of laws reviewed on violent outcomes. Now, this was one of the most thorough studies of the time, and I need to clarify something. Their findings does not mean that gun control has an insignificant effect on homicide rates, but instead that they found insignificant evidence suggests on the effect of gun control. So they're saying, well, we don't even know which way it goes or the other. You might think that's not a convincing thing to use. Well, in my opinion, if the science is split on an issue, that we should take the side of freedom and take the side of the Constitution. The benefit of the doubt should go to the pro-gun side. But even then, there's far more evidence that goes beyond this. William Allen Bartley, in a 1999 study, found that, quote, reducing the supply of guns does not necessarily decrease crime. Now, continued, Gary Kleck, in a 2015 meta-study of 41 studies on gun control and crime, 41, found that, and I quote, research that avoids or minimalizes methodological flaws consistently finds no support for the hypothesis that higher gun prevalence levels causes higher crime rates, especially higher homicide rates. Gary Kleck summarized his findings as follows, quote, it must be tentatively concluded that higher gun ownership rates do not cause higher crime rates, including homicide rates. The science is settled. Gun control does not work. In many cases, it actually increases crime. Science is settled. And if they're going to call themselves the party of science, they need to look at the evidence and stop trying to take away our fundamental, inalienable rights.